I think a lot of it is it's about exposure. That's pretty much what it is. And as you said, like it's all about, like we can't possibly know everything about every culture. But if you're open to learning and you're open to listening, then there's a world of things that you can learn.
This week on Dirty Linen, we are talking about racism against Asians. And that's such a big topic and there's so much to say about it. And one person that I know who thinks a lot about it is Deb Ong. Deb is a chef. She's originally from Singapore. She came to Melbourne to study anthropology at Melbourne Uni in 2004. And as so many people do, they fall in love with the hospitality industry and things start to take a different turn. She's super thoughtful and I love following her on Twitter where, she posts things that really make me think, and I know she's so passionate and has much stuff to say. So welcome to Dirty Linen, Deb. It's so great to have you here.
Hi, thanks, Dani. It's lovely to be here.
Tell me a little bit about what you're up to now, because I know you work as a chef, but there's more to you, isn't there?
Yeah, so I'm working part-time in a cafe in the inner west. I've just worked there as a sous chef part-time, and I've just finished a postgrad diploma in nutrition, and I'm looking to hopefully start a PhD in a couple of months in food literacy.
Wow, that's fantastic. So what's your aim with food literacy and the PhD?
I kind of really want to look at food policy and helping people understand more about food systems and making good choices. I think that kind of sums it up, really.
Oh, that's such a big topic. And I mean, I think so many people have had cause to think about food systems through the pandemic. We've just, been... Oh,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so many people have been confronted about, this, or, just being forced to think about where their food comes from in a way that they perhaps haven't ever in their lives. So really ripe time for you to dig in there and create some change.
Yeah, it definitely is.
So let's get into it because there is so much to talk about. And let's start by talking about kitchen culture and the way that different kinds of discriminations can intersect.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to start. Yeah, I guess kitchen culture, I mean, you've talked about it on your program before, things like misogyny and lots of other things. It can be quite a boys' club sometimes. And, like being a girl in a very male-dominated environment can be quite scary sometimes. And, you kind of just want to fit in, I think, a lot of the time. And, a lot of that discrimination kind of flows into things like race and even sexuality sometimes. Yeah.
I mean, have you experienced that misogyny and racism to be intertwined, or are you able to?
Yeah, they tend to be.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I still remember when I was a commie, I was working in a Haddock restaurant in the city. And, like I was the only girl and I was also kind of the only East Asian person in the kitchen. And in a lot of ways, I find myself quite privileged in the sense that I grew up speaking English. And so we talk a lot about proximity to whiteness, where you kind of speak English and you know a lot about Western culture and you know how to behave, in sort of Western environments. So I kind of had that privilege. And I think the South Asian boys copped it a lot more with regards to racism. There were two South Asian boys working in the kitchen with me. One was in larder. He was a chef de partie, and one was a kitchen hand. So the kitchen hand was slightly darker skinned. I think he was Pakistani. And the other guy who was working a larder, he was, probably a bit more westernized. He spoke English quite well. And it was just quite obvious the different ways that they were treated. And it wasn't just about, the fact that one was a chef and one was a kitchen hand. The guy who was working as a kitchen hand was actually also a qualified chef. And he was constantly dangled this position in Larder, but he was never given the opportunity. And also the way that the boys spoke to him as well, it just wasn't nice. It wasn't, it was very disrespectful sometimes. And he was married with a child, so he was older than the rest of the boys. And they sometimes kind of treated him almost like a dog, which was not nice at all. And watching this from the outside and being in that kind of commie position, I didn't really feel like I was in a position to say anything as well. And you just end up with this kind of really shitty feeling because you feel like you're complicit, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like you're in an incredibly difficult position. I guess, witnessing something like that is diminishing, but I guess also feeling like you have this proximity to whiteness, as you put it, but there's also must have been this feeling that, you could be marginalised in a way as well. And you use this, we were chatting by email earlier, and you use this term, the assimilation Olympics, and this way that racism can pit ethnic minorities against each other. Is this sort of what you're getting at with this story?
Yeah, it's a little bit like that. You kind of, because you already know that you're on the outer. I mean, you look different, and really all you want is to be part of the team and to be part of the club, whatever it is. And so maybe mostly subconsciously, you kind of want people to tell you, oh, you're one of the good ones. We'll keep you. And you kind of subconsciously end up pitting people against each other in that way. I've had people tell me, oh, Asians are so, I can't stand Asian customers, blah, blah, blah. Oh, but you're one of the good ones. So, you're all right. And, there's something very intrinsically wrong with that statement.
It's disgusting. I mean, it's absolutely, deeply prejudiced and ignorant.
Understandably it comes from a good place. You think it's a compliment, but it really isn't, because you're putting down an entire group of people based on, very different, set of standards. I guess you could say.
I'd like to come back to those ideas around Asian customers and those stereotypes, the stereotyping that you're talking about. But can we just I suppose what you're talking about with some of those backhanded, so-called compliments that are actually deeply insulting, is that a microaggression? Is that simply aggressive? I mean, what do you think? And we hear this term microaggressions. Like, what do you think? What does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, there was an author that said, racism or microaggressions are, like death by 1,000 cuts, right? You kind of don't really feel them sometimes. And sometimes they really hurt like paper cuts. They're really, really tiny, and people are like, it's just a small thing, but it really hurts sometimes. And, like backhanded compliments are one example. Things like, you speak really good English. It's like, yeah, I know, but I've been speaking it my whole life. That's not what I meant. And it's like, oh, well, it is what you meant. You assumed that I didn't speak English because of the way I look. And I used to think as a migrant, I was like, it's okay. People are just ignorant. That's fine. There's no way that they know that we all speak English in Singapore. But then the more I think about it, the more I'm like, wait a second, like people look at me. I could very easily be, Asian Australian, and those assumptions just then don't fit at all. And that's not fair to someone who might have grown up in this country, and has been speaking English since they, started talking. And things like microaggressions, they really deeply affect your sense of belonging, and your sense of self-confidence as well. Yeah.
Is it that you would find yourself like you're sort of second guessing yourself, or are you?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much kind of like, what's a good example? I've been in Australia for 14 years, or 17 years actually. And I'm kind of come to a point where I'm like, I consider myself Australian. I love this country. I love the people. I feel like I've been accepted by the community. And then let's say, for example, one day at work, someone comes up to me and says something like, where are you from? Or not so much where are you from, but, more like, do you speak English? And then you just kind of start second guessing yourself and like, well, will I ever be accepted as an Australian if I'm not white? I was trying not to say that, but but that is the reality. That is the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I think we got to go there. You got to call it out. And it makes me think of the Thick Accents project, which we've chatted about recently on the podcast with Lorena Corso.
That was a good one.
Great. Yeah, I think Lorena is amazing, and she's working with Ilanette Bard, who we've also had on Dirty Linen, with their Thick Accents project, which is, I guess, to take ownership of this idea that you've got an accent and to celebrate it. And, we don't all have to look the same or sound the same. And it's actually, how great is it that we don't all look the same and sound the same?
Oh, it's amazing. It's so great. Like multiculturalism is something that, Australia can benefit so much from. There's so many different ideas and perspectives that can help make Australia a better place. We should be embracing it, not be scared of it.
Yeah. And I don't know. I know that it's every individual's job to educate themselves. And, in that sense, Deb, I have this little, check and balance in myself saying, is it even okay to ask you to explain racism to me and to our audience? Is that just, giving extra weight to, the burden that you're carrying unfairly? How do you feel about that? Here I go, asking you, putting another little burden on you.
No, but I do appreciate that you actually do think that, because I think it is an unfair burden for a lot of people, but there are some people that are happy to do it. And it's important that they are asked as well, because you're not always in the right emotional state, or you're not always in the right mental state to deal with these questions, but if it's a safe space, and I feel safe with you, so I really appreciate, the work that you do as well, providing a safe space to talk about these things, then I think it's okay to ask in a respectful way, obviously. Because how else are we going to learn, and I say we, because I have a lot of things to learn as well,
Well, I do too, I guess, we, it's called systemic racism because we're all embedded in systems. And, I guess, I would certainly say for myself, it's like there's stuff that I need to unpick, or I try to unpick over the years and always do better, and always try to see things from other people's perspectives, and just always keep learning and being open. So, I certainly don't come to this conversation, put myself, at any kind of pedestal, but I think it's great to be able to have these conversations with people who want to have them. I think it's important to air the issues, and hopefully they do, just help people just consider what belief systems they're embedded in. And it's not because they're a bad person. It's like,
exactly.
We all grow up in culture.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned this Asian customer stereotyping, and I know that this has actually changed your behaviour in some ways. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I've worked in hospitality for more than 10 years. I've front of house experience and back of house experience as well. And I guess, a lot of things have happened in Melbourne in the last 10 years. We get a lot more people from China coming in, for example, or, people from Korea. And a lot of these people have a lot of money. And and also come from very different cultural backgrounds, right? So it's quite a common misunderstanding that a lot of these customers are difficult to deal with in the city. And this is quite a common thing among hospitality. I've had wait staff complain to me. I've had other chefs complain to me, you know, in workplaces that I've been in the city. And, you know, a lot of this comes from the fact that in Asia, hospitality is very different, right? In cafes and restaurants here, a lot of places have a very set operational procedure. You know, people come in, you know, you take them to a table, you give them glasses of water, you give them a menu, you know, there's kind of a checklist of the way things happen. That doesn't exist in Asia, or in a lot of places in Asia. If you've ever been to Yamcha and how chaotic it can be sometimes, that's pretty much very similar to the kind of service that we get back home. So if you don't raise your hand, no one's going to really come and attend to you. And that's kind of the mentality that a lot of Asian people have when they go to a Western dining restaurant or a cafe. You know, the minute they sit down, they put up their hand and they want to order. And a lot of waitresses or waiters will get annoyed because they're like, oh, you know, we just sat you down, you know, what do you mean you want to order? You haven't even had your coffee yet. You know, or people will come and they don't really understand English, can't really read the menus, and they're like, oh, you know, there are no pictures. And then they try and order from their phones. I've actually seen customers try and order off Instagram. You know, but it's just because you, especially if you come as a tourist, you know, you don't know the language and you can't speak English, and you're trying to find a way to communicate, which is, you know, completely fair, right? I mean, and you know, and then you flip the tables around and you're like, well, you know, like Australian, American, you know, English people go to Asia for holidays and they expect, you know, they don't learn Thai or they don't learn Chinese, and they don't speak these languages when they go to the local restaurants and order food, but they expect the locals to be able to speak English to them. You know, and it's a bit of a double standard.
Yeah, I mean, I fully have a picture in my mind of sitting at a izakaya in Tokyo and looking through the restaurant's Instagram to point to things. So I don't, yeah, and I think any waiter that's listening to this, that, you know, I mean, isn't this an opportunity to create greater understanding? You know, anyone that's had someone explain to them for, you know, in 5 minutes, if that, you know, this is why this person might be acting like this, or, you know, this is why this seems, you know, this is their behavior might seem unusual to you, but this is why. I mean, that's pretty simple to understand. And then it's just like, okay, so how do we help these people spend our money with us? Like, what is the problem?
You know, I mean, that's the professional way to look at it, right? Because I like to see front of house people as problem solvers, right? You know, they're the bridges, right, between the customer and the kitchen, and you're there to facilitate the dining experience. And, you know, I just feel it's very unprofessional when you know, complain about things that are really not their fault. Yeah. And so as a customer, like my husband and myself, I mean, we're both Asian, and we've noticed, you know, a very unpleasant shift in the treatment that we get as diners when we go into the city. And yeah, you know, because we both have front of house experience, we know what is professional and what isn't. And we understand that you have to make a lot of snap judgments when you're on the job. And stereotypes do exist. It's that's the reality of the situation. Like, you know, that's how human beings think, and that's fine. But when those stereotypes are proven to be untrue for certain people, then you should change the way you act towards them. And that's where we found that there was an issue, because people were putting us in this box, like, oh, Asians are difficult customers. And then the level of service we get is very much diminished. And we can see from the way that the same waiter or the waitress, you know, treats different tables. And you can see that there's a very stark difference, where we're basically getting very minimal service and very minimal attention, which, you know, as a diner is not a very nice experience.
It's not hospitality. I mean, it's really, I think it's really shocking and so disappointing. And I think anyone listening to this would think, well, this is not the Australian hospitality world that we want to be in. And it's also, it puts you in the position, the horrible position of trying to differentiate yourself from a group that for you to create this deepened sense of otherness where it's like, well, yes, I'm Asian, but I'm not those Asians. And not that you should be thinking about those Asians in any kind of inferior way anyway. It's like, it just puts that weight on you to solve somebody else's problem and to educate in the moment when actually what you're trying to do is spend money with the business and have a nice time.
Correct. Like my husband's lovely, he's really friendly, really talkative. He's, off the bat, he's always asking, waiters, how your day is and, how's service and that sort of stuff. And so, like sometimes the cold responses that we get just don't make sense. It's like, well, we're trying to be friendly, and we spend money. We order multiple glasses of wine. We always order heaps of food. So it's not like we're being stingy or, asking for anything unreasonable. So it is a little bit disappointing.
I mean, I think we like to think of the Australian hospitality industry as diverse and of a high standard and welcoming. And, we celebrate many different cuisines. There's a lot of interpolation of cuisines, create a lot of exciting dishes, exciting experiences. And, there's so many places to go, I guess. The food that has already been here for, millennia hasn't really been brought into the mainstream in a meaningful way. There's so much work to do with that. But, how do you think Australia generally is doing with multicultural dining, a celebration of that? Is it, where are we going?
I think it's going in a good direction. You just look at the number of hatted restaurants and there's a lot more diversity now than there was, let's say, 10 years ago. So, that's a good thing. And food is always going to be the easiest way to introduce yourself to any kind of culture. And so the dining scene is obviously, I guess, a good indicator of how more diverse Australia is getting. I guess the question is how deep that multiculturalism actually goes and whether it's just a surface thing. Is it? I think the direction that we need to move towards is, I guess, taking the idea of fine dining and starting to make it a bit more democratic, if that makes any sense. Because, traditionally fine dining, if you think of fine dining, you think, very Eurocentric. You think, individual plates, very kind of French, European settings, not so much casual dining, not so much sharing and communal eating. And I feel that, if you really truly want to embrace the diversity of food, you really need to start looking at different philosophies of eating. Because, like Jock said something last year during MasterChef, something about how Asian food doesn't lend itself well to fine dining. I remember hearing that and going, wait a second, we've got so many different kinds of fine dining in Asia. We've got royal, we have royal cuisines in Cambodia and Thailand and Laos.
Absolutely. I mean, kaiseki cuisine. I mean, there's so many examples of incredibly refined Asian styles of dining.
Exactly. And it's almost as if those techniques, and the techniques are amazing. I mean, as someone who is trained in Western techniques, like I look at some of the Asian techniques and I'm like, my mind is blown because it's so intricate and it's so delicate, and yet somehow it's almost classed as not fine enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's imperialism, really, isn't it? I mean,
yes, it really is.
I mean, I feel like I mean, I keep harking back to Japanese cuisine in this conversation, I suppose, because that's where I felt my ineptness the most, just in terms of appreciating the subtleties of what is being put in front of me, where it's just, that there would be 7 different types of shoyu in a sauce, and that things are boiled in different broths for different lengths of time and then put together. And I just feel like, wow, there is so much going on here. And it's like, me trying to even hear the tones in a tonal language such as Mandarin. It's like, I feel like I am not smart and subtle and attuned enough to appreciate this. And I think it's almost that, I guess with all of these kinds of things, is it a lot about understanding that you come from a place of ignorance and that there is always more to learn and appreciate, and that if you think that a cuisine isn't refined or fine, then perhaps you just need to look a bit harder or learn a bit more.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is it's about exposure. That's pretty much what it is. And as you said, it's all about, we can't possibly know everything about every culture. But if you're open to learning and you're open to listening, then there's a world of things that you can learn. I mean, it's interesting that you talk about Japanese food, because, out of all the Asian cuisines, the Japanese cuisine is probably the one that has lent itself the best to, Western sense of fine dining, just because, of the fact that it can. What am I talking about? Especially you're talking about things like kaiseki and things like making, the sushi masters. It's all very individual. It's all very individual, and so it kind of lends itself well. And that's why, Minai Mishima is, has got 3 hats, because it kind of lends itself very well to those philosophies of thinking about food. Whereas you look at the rest of Asia, you look at curries and you look at, laksas and that sort of stuff. People are like, that's street food. But there's so much more that you haven't seen, just because I guess Asians feel that there isn't much of a market. I don't know what it is, but it's almost as if they're scared to bring it over because they think they can't sell it, which is a bit sad.
Well, it is really sad. And if I think about laksa, I mean, that's just a journey all on its own. I mean, it's many different journeys. I remember going around Penang and just trying lots of different laksas and just being absolutely blown away. And that is, with there's incredible layers of flavor that, I just feel like, well, I don't have the flavor memory or the knowledge to unpick this, but I know, with every spoonful, I am just infused with this incredible skill, knowledge, and culture that, I can taste it, and I can admire it. And watching people make those dishes, it's a blur of skill and knowledge and, just heritage that I'm feel really privileged to experience. But I know that I'm, barely at the beginning of understanding a dish like that.
Oh, even I'm barely at the beginning. I love making laksa. It's one of the things that I love to do. And it's, and it's such a giving dish, and it's, and it's so complex in its flavors. People are like, it's just soup noodles. It's like, no, there's so much that goes in there. There's so much balancing that's involved. There's so much skill, and I'm still trying to, perfect my family recipe laksa.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it does seem like Australia is really, has a great opportunity to do so much better in this space. There are so many people from different places and with different traditions living here together. I mean, do you think that we do have a really good opportunity to, I guess, dismantle some of the racism that is inherent in our society through the way that we engage with food?
Yeah, I really do think that Australia has has a very unique opportunity in this space and time, just because of its location where it is. It's it's not part of Europe, and so yes, it does have a lot of influence from there, because we have a lot of European migrants in Australia, but there are also so many migrants from so many different other places who have the opportunity to influence the way that we think and the way that we eat, and the way that we dine. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. I mean, because
it's just that openness, isn't it?
Yeah, like, it really is.
We're all here. Like,
exactly.
let's eat. Let's listen.
Let's have a conversation.
But it's, I mean, people, it's a cliche to say that food connects us, but I suppose it's like, what do we do next after we've eaten the food? We've loved the laksa, we've slurped the noodles, we've had the lamajun, we've, whatever it is, we've had the kaiseki. Like, what next, or what, or how? Like, what are the other ways of eating and appreciating that food that actually connects us to the people whose heritage is bound up in creating it? And how does that make society a better place?
Oh, there's so many things packed in there.
Yeah. I'm not asking you to answer that, but but there must be something, this must be a path that we can travel together to create change, all of us.
Yeah, look, I think conversation is a good place to start, which is where we are at this point in time. But I think really sort of critically thinking and dismantling the way we prize certain restaurants and certain ways of eating, like looking at the whole institution of hatted restaurants, right? I mean, the fact that we're not connected with Michelin is actually a really great thing, because we have that opportunity to redefine, what is fine dining? Does it necessarily have to be, in a certain kind of restaurant, with plated food and with a certain kind of wine list, or a certain kind of, certain kind of menu? Can it be communal? I mean, you look at the hatted restaurants, and I guess your more Asian style communal eating are kind of all restricted to your one hat, because they're always looked at as casual. And there's nothing wrong with that, but when you understand that a lot of Asian fine dining is communal, then it kind of takes you to another place, because then you're like, oh, you can actually eat this way and consider it as refined. I don't know if I'm making any sense. I feel like I'm rambling.
No. I think we have, it's these kind of issues, like there's so much in it, as you say, and I feel like we do need to sort of circle around it until we sort of land on something. And there's no one place to land. There's a whole bunch of different places, that we'll keep landing and just keep, I guess, threading and unthreading and tying and untying, and, hopefully moving forward with, respect and dignity and greater understanding. I mean, I think everything you're saying makes a whole heap of sense. And I think basically it's about respecting culture, no matter what culture it is, and appreciating it on its own terms. It's definitely my basic philosophy of restaurant criticism is, what is the place trying to do? Do they succeed in doing it? And I think that's, I guess, the short way of saying what you're saying, in a way, where it's like, cuisines and restaurants don't have to compete on any terms other than their own. And they can be appreciated for their own project, not because we impose these that we impose a definition of fine dining, or, of what it means to be a great restaurant. It's it's just like, is it good, basically?
They shouldn't need to conform to a pattern of doing things. That's pretty much it. There's some Asian chefs that are doing amazing things. You think of, places like Sunda, you think of places like Anchovy, but is it necessary to, and chefs use this word a lot and I really dislike it. Is there really a need to elevate the food? Does it really need that? And what does it mean to elevate anyway? That in itself is such a loaded word because it implies a lot of other things.
Well, it's a brilliant question. And when we were speaking, like last month about sexism and about women, I mean, we often have this notion of the male chef who elevates his mother's or his grandmother's cuisine and turns it into something else. And I think that sort of diminishes where that food came from. There was nothing wrong with it. It didn't need, as you say, fixing. It was what it was, and it's not now improved. So yeah, I think it's a word that needs to be used really carefully as well. And honestly, here again, I'll say that I think I'm guilty of framing restaurant food like that, and it's something I try to be more careful about now. But yeah, we're all on a journey. Deb, I really, really thank you for coming on this journey too, and sharing your experience and insights. I think you're such a great thinker about all this stuff. And I'm really excited that you're diving back into academia to, give us more food for thought.
Oh, it's so terrifying. But no, thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed having this chat. It's been good.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I know it's going to make a lot of people think. And yeah, I wish you all the best. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you so much, Dani.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtyLinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta @Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This